This was the evening I was meant to watch his triumph from a distance. Tucked into a fortress of velvet cushions in our San Francisco penthouse, I was on strict orders for complete bed rest, our unborn son shifting gently inside me. On the far wall, a live feed of the Global Tech Summit was streaming, a flawless connection to a world I was too fragile to attend. As I waited for my husband, Damien, to deliver the keynote speech that would define his career, he'd phoned an hour earlier, his voice buzzing with that signature pre-keynote intensity, saying he needed to run through some last-minute data visualizations with his head of product. I believed him, because my entire life was constructed around believing him. When the announcer's voice boomed his name, a wave of pride washed over me. I saw him walk onto the stage, a titan of industry, at his absolute peak, about to deliver one of the visionary talks he was revered for. And then, a small notification lit up the screen of his smart watch, which he had left charging on my nightstand. It was an alert from his airline app, confirming a flight update. But the flight wasn't back to San Francisco. It was a private jet charter to a secluded resort in Cabo. The folder was labeled Anniversary Surprise. The passenger manifest listed his name and the name of his head of product, Sasha Romanoff. The file wasn't a data visualization. It was a complete itinerary, not for the tech summit, but for a private beachfront bungalow, booked for 2. I saw her name next to his, their secret getaway, detailed in a clinical PDF. The booking wasn't for a single night. It was for a full week, a carefully orchestrated affair disguised as corporate travel. They didn't have to be caught in a photo. The sheer, calculated logistics of it felt like a razor blade in my throat. I processed it all, bathed in the soft glow of our panoramic city view. A broken, strangled noise tore from my throat. Why was he going to a resort with her? My entire body seized up. I fumbled for the glass of water beside me, but my hand was trembling too much to hold it. My own phone lit up on the silk sheets. A text from Damien. Keynote was a smash hit. Heading to the hotel, love you. A hot, violent wave of nausea crashed over me. From the live stream, a wave of deafening applause rolled in, the crowd oblivious that my world had just been obliterated by a push notification. I switched the screen off, but it was futile. The image of their names on that flight manifest was burned into my mind, more vivid than any photograph. A sudden, piercing pain shot through my lower back. Oh, please, not now. I gasped for air, struggling to contain the hurricane he had just unleashed inside of me. It's all right, little boy. We're going to be all right. But I knew, with a coldness that felt like it could stop my heart, that this was just the first crack before the foundation crumbled. Because the infidelity I discovered in that digital itinerary was nothing compared to the secrets I was about to find. And the next revelation would be infinitely more devastating. For years, my entire purpose had been to curate the world around Damien's genius. I held on to that role through countless dinners I ate by myself, forgotten anniversaries, and weekends spent researching pediatricians while Damien coded the future. He always claimed he was too lost in the macro vision to handle the minutia. I was the minutia. Our son's high-risk pregnancy was minutia. I was the silent, unseen scaffolding holding up the grand structure of our life. Lying there, in our vast, silent penthouse, I gazed out at the twinkling lights of the Bay Bridge he so proudly called his view, feeling like a stranger in my own life. The blueprints for the eco-friendly family home I'd been designing for us in Sonoma were rolled up on a nearby table, and the vintage Rolex Damien gave me when the pregnancy was confirmed, expensive gestures meant to mask his profound emotional detachment, now seemed like relics from a marriage that was entirely imaginary. The brutal truth was that Damien had been architecting his departure long before tonight's accidental digital confession. He stopped asking about the architectural plans for the nursery. He missed the 4D ultrasound, where we saw our son's perfect, tiny face for the first time. He called the privacy concerns I raised about his new, smart city project overreacting. He dismissed my profound exhaustion as just pregnancy hormones. Every small act of indifference was a stress fracture in the life we'd built. So subtle, I didn't see the collapse coming until I was buried in the rubble. I excused it all. I made my world smaller to fit into his. I told myself that building a legacy demanded sacrifice, and my role was simply to bear it quietly. But seeing the details of that planned strategy retreat with Serena forced a truth into the light that I'd been shoving into the shadows for months. Julian wasn't just preoccupied with work. He had emotionally evacuated our marriage long before I ever felt the first kick. I shifted on the sheets, my hand resting protectively on my belly, and my elbow bumped the sleek, carbon fiber laptop he'd forgotten after his last investor trip to Singapore. It carried a faint trace of perfume, something rich with sandalwood and tuberose, a fragrance I had never worn. He used to smell of my own citrus shampoo and the crisp vetiver of his cologne. Now he carried the scent of another woman's world, a world I was very clearly not welcome in. My son turned inside me, a slow, powerful movement. "What are we supposed to do now?" I whispered to him. "I have no idea," I answered myself, because pretending we were okay would only shatter us further. His movement was a lifeline. It wasn't despair that filled me, but a cold, crystalline focus. I wasn't in the middle of losing my husband. I had already lost him. Even so, I could never have guessed that the betrayal ran so much deeper than just an affair. Someone else was about to reveal just how long Damien had been constructing an entirely different life. Morning arrived. Though I had never found sleep, I had spent the entire night staring at the flight confirmation. But what truly kept me awake was a chilling, practical fear. Our assets, our properties, our son's future trust, Damien's chief financial officer, was in charge of everything. For years, Damien had insisted it was simply more practical for his own team to manage our complex portfolio. I had agreed because I wanted to be a supportive spouse, but a real partnership is built on transparency. And at some point, he had stopped seeing me as his wife and had begun managing me like a non-voting shareholder in his company. I reached for my tablet on the nightstand and launched the wealth management portal I hardly ever used. A complex list of our joint holdings materialized on the screen. Shell corporations, offshore accounts, real estate syndicates. The figures were astronomical, intangible, and felt as if they belonged to someone else entirely. Without Damien's biometric approval, I was completely barred from accessing a single cent. My hands grew cold as the reality set in. My terror wasn't about being without Damien. It was the absolute horror of bringing my son into a life that his own father had systematically made insecure. A wave of lightheadedness washed over me, and my breathing grew shallow. A panic attack. I squeezed my eyelids shut and began the breathing techniques my therapist had taught me. Inhale for 4 seconds. Hold for 7. Exhale for 8. I whispered into the empty room. You are secure. My son's safety was the only thing that mattered. The thought of Damien wielding our child's future as a weapon in a divorce sent a cold dread slithering up my spine. I navigated to the online portal for our primary joint bank account, the one with the clean, simple interface. My stomach plummeted. Authentication failure. Damien had altered the security questions. He always used his security team's recommendations as a pretext for updating passwords, but this was different. This felt like a bank vault being sealed, a clear and final signal that I was locked out. My laptop chimed. It was a notification from an encrypted messaging client I had never seen before. The sender was anonymous. You need to investigate Damien's shell companies. Start with Helios Innovations. I froze. Attached to the message was a data file protected by a password. The password was one word, Sasha. Inside was a screenshot of a single wire transfer. $50 million, funneled to a holding company in the Cayman Islands just 3 weeks prior. My baby kicked, a hard, sharp jab, as if he could feel the shock coursing through me. I swallowed hard against a throat that was suddenly parched. My fear was being cauterized by a clean, searing rage. But a much deeper anxiety was taking root, because this anonymous messenger knew infinitely more than I did. And if Damien was secretly diverting millions of dollars, what other deceptions had he constructed right under my roof? And who was this person operating from the shadows, feeding me these devastating clues? The hours following the tech summit, keynote, dissolved into a surreal, sleepless haze. By 10 p.m., the penthouse was deathly quiet, the city lights below resembling a spray of dying sparks. I lay in our bed, my eyes fixed on the bedroom door, half hoping he would walk through it and half terrified that he was already gone for good. My phone remained silent. No texts from Damien, no calls, no pathetic excuses for running late. Absolutely nothing. At 11:30, I dialed his number. It went directly to his smooth, professional voicemail. I tried again. The same result. The man who organized his life in 5-minute increments, who preached that flawless execution was paramount, had simply disappeared the moment his own perfectly designed life revealed a flaw. I wanted to feel a tidal wave of fury, but all I could muster was a deep, empty ache radiating from my chest. Beyond the floor-to-ceiling windows, San Francisco shone, completely unconcerned with my private implosion. The low hum of the city, the distant cry of a fairy horn. It all conspired to make me feel utterly insignificant, as if the entire world was watching my life fall apart and hadn't even bothered to look away. I forced myself out of bed, desperate to feel a solid surface beneath my feet. On the polished mahogany desk sat the leather-bound first edition he cherished. It was a trophy from his perfect world, a world he let me inhabit, but never truly own. My phone buzzed again. Another text from a blocked number. Ask about the Cartier Commission. My pulse hammered as I opened his personal ledger, a place he meticulously recorded all his private expenditures. A list of transactions filled the page. A charity auction in Monaco, a board dinner in London, a weekend fishing trip in the Hamptons, and named as the recipient of a custom diamond necklace, Chloe Vance. There were charges for private jet charters for two, a suite at the Ritz in Paris. And the most recent entry, a down payment on a penthouse in a new downtown high-rise, closing in the next few weeks. A bitter acid rose in my throat. Arthur wasn't ignoring my calls because he was navigating a volatile market. He was with her right this second. He had engineered this secret life with the same cold precision he used to build his hedge fund. I stared at the ledger until the names and numbers blurred. All those nights he was supposedly working late to close a deal. All the times he said he was flying out for a last-minute investor meeting. He wasn't just lying, he was systematically constructing an entirely separate existence right under my nose. The sprawling penthouse was suddenly, terrifyingly quiet. I thought I was hearing things, but then our private elevator chimed, signaling an arrival on our floor. Someone was right outside our apartment door. Someone was swiping a keycard. A series of electronic beeps was followed by a sharp, aggressive buzz and a flash of red light. Access denied. A short pause. And then, complete silence. I held my breath, waiting for the sound of someone walking away. But the quiet was absolute. My own heart pounded a frantic rhythm. It could be a new resident on the wrong floor. It could be Arthur, having had too much to drink and forgetting he'd just had the locks updated. Or it could be her, assuming her key still worked. I couldn't bear to find out. I slid the heavy, old-fashioned deadbolt into place and went back to his desk. The ledger read like a confession Arthur never intended for me to see. There was a charge for a private table at a restaurant he'd always claimed was our special place for that very night. 2 seats for the opera, purchased just last week. And then I saw the entry that turned my blood to ice, a recurring payment to a black car service, with a daily route between our Upper East Side address and Chloe Vance's loft in Soho. Not once or twice, but almost every single day for the past 6 months. A wave of vertigo hit me. For half a year, he had been living a completely different life while I was at home on doctor-ordered bed rest, lovingly designing a nursery for our son. On a whim, I tried to open our joint portfolio app. Authentication. Failed. It was another locked door, proof that Arthur was systematically cutting me out of the life we had supposedly built together. My phone buzzed with a text from the blocked number. Check the safe. The one behind the Rothko. My eyes shot to the massive, color-drenched painting that dominated the library wall. The elegant, curated walls of our New York City penthouse suddenly felt like a prison. I moved silently into his library, the antique rug muffling my steps, and looked at the safe. The combination was our anniversary. My stomach twisted as I opened it, revealing not jewelry or bonds, but a single, leather-bound file labeled Project Sovereign. I opened it to find statements for offshore accounts, incorporation papers for shell companies, and legal retainers, all in the names of Arthur Sterling and Chloe Vance. The air was stolen from my lungs. It all made a horrifying kind of sense. The constant talk of market uncertainty, the growing distance between us. This was more than an affair. He was executing a total liquidation of our shared assets, one that had no room for me or our unborn child, a future where we were simply a liability to be jettisoned. I collapsed into his armchair, the file shaking in my hands. His betrayal wasn't a moment of passion. It was a calculated financial strategy, and the most vicious part was that he was funding it with the money from the sale of the art gallery I had spent my career building. A sharp, cold thought cut through my shock. Someone had made sure I would find this. Someone knew exactly where Arthur kept his secrets. My phone lit up again. He knows the safe was opened. He's on his way. I stared at the screen, my pulse racing. Because if Arthur came home and saw this knowledge in my eyes, I knew what he was capable of when a major investment went south. And this anonymous source clearly thought I needed to be gone before he decided to cut his losses. The next morning, the sunlight glinting off the skyscrapers made the penthouse feel impossibly cold. I hadn't slept at all, caught between the terror of Arthur's return and the fear that he wouldn't. I tried to eat for the baby's sake, but my hands were trembling too much. The baby, a tiny, innocent life caught in this web of deceit. While forcing myself to drink some water, I noticed he had left his burner phone on the charger. Desperate, I picked it up. A new message was on the screen, time-stamped 2:15 a.m. It was from C.V. Chloe Vance. I couldn't breathe. I braced for a triumphant, cruel message. But as I read the preview, I realized it wasn't meant for me. It was sent to a group chat with Arthur and their lawyers. The subject was simple. Sovereign, final phase. A. Your devoted husband routine is perfect. She has no idea. Once the last transfer from the gallery sale clears on Monday, we can file. The Cayman Trust is ready. My heart stopped. The words swam before me, Chloe wasn't just his affair. She was his partner in crime. The message had a link to a secure spreadsheet titled Asset Migration. It was a detailed plan mapping our entire net worth, the penthouse, our Hamptons beach house, my family's art collection, all being systematically funneled into untraceable bearer bonds and offshore accounts before I could ever be served with divorce papers. They were planning to leave me with absolutely nothing. They had even scheduled the termination of my high-risk pregnancy insurance policy. A wave of pure, cold fury washed through me. This was not the end of a marriage. It was a hostile takeover of my life, a clinical and final erasure of our entire history together. I forwarded the entire data file to a secure, encrypted email address. Then factory reset the burner phone. I needed proof. I needed ammunition. As I put the phone down, a strong kick from my baby reminded me exactly who I was fighting for. "It's you and me now, little guy," I whispered, my voice raw. "I've got us." But the words felt fragile in the vast, silent apartment. My own phone lit up. It was the blocked number. "You have the evidence. Leave now. One bag. Do not be there when he arrives." A profound chill settled deep in my bones. Whoever was texting me knew everything, and I had a terrifying feeling that their next warning would be the one that destroyed what was left of my world. That afternoon, I was in a taxi heading downtown. My doctor had prescribed complete bed rest, but staying in that apartment felt like a far greater risk. A primal urge to protect my child was screaming at me to flee. As the taxi moved through traffic, my mind flashed back to the museum gala a few weeks ago. I'd been too tired to go, so Arthur went alone. A friend told me the next day she'd seen him in a deep, private conversation with Chloe Vance near the main exhibit. I had brushed it off as a discussion about the market. Now, the memory played back as a public display of my own humiliation. My face burned with shame. All of New York society must have known. The city's elite had probably watched them together and felt a sliver of pity for the pregnant, clueless wife at home. Central Park, receding from view, looked like a monument to the life he was stealing. I gripped my handbag, a single hot tear cutting a path down my face. He didn't just break our vows. He leveraged our marriage into a bad investment and left me holding the bag. He had been by my side at every single specialist appointment, his hand resting on my stomach, talking about which schools our son would attend. He had hired a world-renowned designer for the nursery, personally selecting every antique and piece of art himself. It was all a performance, a perfectly managed portfolio designed to keep me docile while he executed his exit strategy. And the most monstrous part was his plan to strip me of everything: the home we'd made, the future we'd planned, the financial security for our child. He intended to leave me with nothing but a ruined life and a baby he clearly saw as a bad asset. I checked into a small, anonymous hotel, the sheer weight of his betrayal making it hard to breathe, and let out a sob that felt ripped from my soul. I wasn't just being left. I was being liquidated. My son deserved a better story than one that started with a father who saw him as an acceptable loss in a financial strategy. I wiped my tears, the grief inside me hardening into something like steel. I refused to be a footnote on his balance sheet. For my son, I would become the market crash he never, ever saw coming. I swore a silent oath to my child, my palm resting over the curve of my belly. As I turned onto the expressway, my phone vibrated one last time. It was the anonymous alert I now knew Arthur had set up to track me. "Arthur is home. He knows you accessed the drive. The car's geolocator will activate in 10 minutes. Go dark. Now." My knuckles turned white as I gripped the steering wheel. This wasn't a protective measure for our family. It was a digital leash. Then the next video call preview loaded on his open server, and I understood they were conspiring to ruin my future as well. The file name was cold and detached. Phase 2, Liability Mitigation. The woman on the screen was named Isla. A sliver of ice slid down my spine. I glanced over at the floor-to-ceiling windows of our penthouse, terrified he would return. Far below, the lights of Chicago twinkled, completely unaware. It wasn't a single video. It was a full archive, a meticulously detailed strategy for the hostile takeover of our shared life. I made myself take a long, deep breath, placing a hand on my pregnant stomach. This was no longer about a broken marriage. This was about survival. Arthur wasn't just planning to divorce me. He was planning a corporate-style liquidation of my entire existence. The kind of liquidation that would leave me and our unborn child with absolutely nothing. I clicked open a folder of screenshots showing crypto transactions. My heart hammered in my chest. He was moving millions into an untraceable wallet. It was happening in real time. A cold sickness washed over me. Another file delivered the final crushing blow. Subject, our next chapter. It was a virtual reality tour of a cliffside estate in Big Sur I had never even heard of. My entire body began to tremble. I had no clue who this Isla was, other than her title listed in the file data, Risk Management Consultant, and, it was now clear, his new partner. But staying to confront Arthur felt like a real danger. My gut told me he was the true risk. A man who could systematically arrange the financial destruction of his pregnant wife was capable of doing whatever it took to get what he wanted. I began uploading every single file to a new, secure cloud account I'd just created, my fingers flying over the trackpad. When I saw the folder named Project Chimera, I opened it, my breath catching. Inside were encrypted contracts and digital deeds. A man in a tailored suit smiled out from a photo, ID, on one document. He looked powerful, with sharp eyes that missed nothing. He turned his head slightly as Arthur came into the study. Eleanor. I flinched at my name. What are you doing on my server? Someone needs to make sure our digital assets are secure, especially with the baby on the way. My voice was shockingly calm. My name is Marcus Thorne. The name on the digital ID hit me like a physical shock. Marcus Thorne, the tech visionary, Arthur's single biggest investor, the man who had funded his entire firm. Why was Arthur buying Icelandic server farms with him through a shell company? My gaze dropped to my belly, then met Arthur's. You and your son need a future with zero risk. He can never find out you saw this. Marcus is on a video call with his legal team as we speak. They're pushing the final acquisition of the Chimera AI startup. My heart seized up. Pushing it? My brother, Leo, an investigative tech journalist, gave a grim nod over our video chat. That's the word. They're using a high-frequency trading algorithm to bypass the usual SEC review period. My vision blurred, and then he said the one thing that made my entire world stop. Ellie, Arthur isn't just keeping this deal from you. He's keeping it from his own partners at the firm. Hours later, as I crept through our vast, silent penthouse overlooking Millennium Park, Leo's warning was a deafening echo in my mind. If Arthur was prepared to double-cross his own company, what hope did I have? I had returned for just one item, a cold storage crypto wallet hidden in the back of his cigar humidor. In the nursery, the glow of the city painted a stripe of light across the assembled crib, a bitter reminder of a life he had just destroyed. I prayed I would be out before he got back, but Leo was adamant that the wallet's transaction history was the only tangible proof of his illegal trades. I located it behind a box of rare cigars, my hands shaking as I retrieved it from its hiding place. The very cigars he had purchased the day we learned I was pregnant. The thick, oppressive silence of the apartment felt like it was holding its breath, waiting for a confrontation. I clutched the device and was about to leave when I heard the private elevator chime, signaling his arrival. The designer clutch in my hand, which held my phone with high-resolution photos of the wallet's transaction logs, felt as heavy as a brick. At 11:15 at night, Arthur walked in. He smelled of pricey whiskey and the thrill of victory. His expensive jacket was draped over one arm, his expression radiating confidence. He stopped short when he saw me standing in the foyer, the crypto wallet held tightly in my hands. "You're up late," he stated, his tone empty of emotion. My own was surprisingly firm. "You missed our birthing class." He didn't even react. A last-minute deal came through. I didn't need to fight him. I walked to the chrome console table in the entryway and set down the wallet, plugging it into the tablet that lay there and keying in the password. The screen lit up, displaying a long list of transactions. For the first time in our 7-year marriage, I watched as genuine, raw panic washed over his face. "Where did you get that?" he demanded, his voice a faint whisper. "It was in the humidor," I replied, my determination hardening, along with the incorporation papers for the shell company, the unsent resignation letter on your desktop, and the detailed strategy to make sure your pregnant wife was left with nothing but manufactured debt. His jaw went rigid. The charming facade of the brilliant venture capitalist finally crumbled. "Eleanor, you have no idea what you are getting into. Airline reservations for 2. A week at a private villa on Lake Como with a woman named Isla." "For a strategy retreat?" I challenged, my voice shaking. His complete and utter silence was the only answer I needed. The atmosphere in our perfectly designed living room became thick and suffocating. He took a menacing step toward me, his voice dropping to a low snarl. "You don't know the people involved in this, Eleanor, and it would be incredibly smart for you to just forget everything you've seen." The threat in his voice was undeniable. There was not a trace of an apology in his eyes. He wasn't worried about me leaving him. He was petrified of me exposing him. I took a deliberate step backward, my pulse racing. And then he made a fatal mistake, a desperate, quiet mumble he thought I was too far away to hear. "If she shows Leo that transaction log," he muttered to himself, "the entire Chimera deal is dead." The words struck me with the force of a physical impact. Leo. He was aware my brother was a journalist. This was much, much bigger than I had imagined. For a moment, the hand-woven rug under my feet seemed to shift, as if the truth had destabilized the very foundation of my life. I took a slow, deep breath and stared directly into Arthur's eyes. "What about my brother?" I demanded, my voice chillingly steady. Arthur went still. His gaze flickered toward the nursery we had just finished decorating, then snapped back to me. "You misheard me," he said, the lie coming out far too quickly. It was all coming out too quickly, tangled in a web of frantic excuses. "No," I breathed. The word a tiny crack in the deafening silence of our penthouse apartment. "I heard you just fine." Julian dragged a hand through his meticulously styled hair, a gesture of pure frustration. "Ilara, it's not that simple. The pressure from our investors, the burn rate. I had to make some aggressive plays." His voice shifted, dripping with the patronizing sweetness he used when he was about to shut me down. "You know how you worry about the small stuff, and with the baby on the way? That's why I handled it without you." I just looked at him. Every time he'd called me non-technical, every time he'd dismissed my concerns about his company's ethics, all those little cuts were now bleeding into a single, gaping wound. "So how many aggressive plays are we talking about?" I countered, my voice dangerously level. 1? 10? Was any part of the world you built for me ever even real? Julian's face hardened into a mask of indignation. "I gave you a life people write articles about, A little gratitude wouldn't kill you. That familiar wave of guilt he'd engineered for years began to swell, but this time it crashed against a wall of stone. In its place, something else was taking root. Anger, for sure, but also an instinct for self-preservation that I hadn't accessed in years. Providing for me is not the same as being truthful with me, I declared. A muscle spasmed in his jaw. You have no idea what you're talking about. He took another step in my direction. I moved back. My hand reflexively covered my clutch, where my phone, now holding copies of the server files and a live audio recording of our entire exchange, was securely zipped inside. He saw the movement. What's in the clutch, Eleanor? Leverage, I said, my voice resonating with a newfound power. His expression darkened, and for the very first time, I saw pure terror in his eyes. It wasn't the terror of a husband losing his wife and child. It was the terror of a predator losing control of its prey. His power, his freedom. Give it to me, he ordered. No. He lunged, but the instincts of motherhood had already made me fiercely defensive. I snatched my clutch and darted behind a large, abstract sculpture, putting its cold, unyielding mass between us. My heart was pounding frantically, but my voice was unwavering. You will never have this, and you will never come anywhere near me or this baby again. His breathing became labored. You are not walking out of this penthouse with that phone. A terrifying coldness swept through me. Just watch me. As if summoned by my words, the fetal heart rate monitor on my smartwatch vibrated gently on my wrist. A routine check. The unexpected buzz caused Arthur to flinch. I used that single second of his distraction to make a run for the private elevator in the foyer. At that very moment, my phone buzzed from within my clutch. A new message from Leo. Ellie. The woman isn't just his lover. She's Marcus Thorne's daughter. The words on the screen seemed to drain all the air from the hallway. His biggest investor's daughter. My thoughts raced, frantically trying to assemble the pieces of a corporate conspiracy I never knew I was trapped in the middle of. The pristine nursery, filled with soft grays and yellows, was supposed to be a sanctuary, but now it just felt like a cage, tying my future irrevocably to his. I'm leaving, Julian, I said, and the words hung in the silent room with a weight that surprised me. You're not going anywhere. His voice was unnervingly calm, a mask for the cold fury underneath. He stepped in front of the doorway, but a flicker of hesitation, a primal fear of jostling my swollen stomach, kept him from getting too close. For a man so ready to shatter our lives, he was strangely terrified of damaging the proof of it. With my designer tote hanging from my arm and a small, hastily packed weekender in my hand, I stood my ground. Move, Julian, I commanded. He didn't. A smirk, cruel and assured, twisted his lips. Alara, don't be naive. Do you honestly think you can just walk out of here, 8 months pregnant, and start over, without my money, without the protection of the Croft name? The condescending lecture was an old, familiar weapon, but it couldn't hurt me anymore. Not after what I found in that folder on the cloud drive. I sidestepped him and yanked open the heavy mahogany door. The private marble foyer of our Nob Hill penthouse seemed cold and unwelcoming. I placed a hand over my belly, my son's well-being the only anchor in my spinning world. A wave of adrenaline, sharp and metallic, coursed through me, followed by a deep, animalistic fear. 2,000 feet below, the lights of San Francisco glittered like a shattered constellation. I lunged for the elevator, my own heartbeat roaring in my ears. As I hurried across the cavernous lobby, my phone buzzed. A car is waiting for you on the Clay Street side. Get in. Thea, my sister, my only port in this storm. There was no one else I could turn to, no one else who would believe me. A black SUV was idling by the curb, exactly as she said. The driver got out and opened the back door. "Mrs. Croft, your sister sent me. She said to tell you she's at the firm," the driver explained in a low voice. A suffocating wave of panic crashed over me. Every instinct screamed at me to flee, to simply vanish into the night, but going back upstairs to that penthouse was unthinkable. The man I'd left standing there was 1,000 times more dangerous than the one I had woken up beside. I slid onto the cool leather seat. The door clicked shut, and the locks engaged with a solid thud, making me feel simultaneously rescued and captured. As the SUV slipped into the river of nighttime traffic on Van Ness, I looked back at our building. I could see Julian's form in the massive window, a dark silhouette watching as the city swallowed me whole. The driver spoke again, his tone even. "Ms. Vance is waiting." "Why?" I managed to ask, my voice a shaky whisper. His eyes met mine in the rearview mirror. "To show you the rest of the files on Chloe Sterling, and to explain why Julian was so terrified of the story she was about to publish." The SUV moved swiftly through the financial district, the city's gleaming glass towers reflecting on the windows like fractured images of the life I was running from. My hand remained on my stomach, a protective shield over the tiny life who was the only solid thing in my world of chaos. Finally, the driver pulled up to a stately historic building on Montgomery Street. The building was the picture of quiet power, the kind of place where fortunes were made in silence, not with fanfare. He guided me through a discreet side entrance, down a hushed, oak-paneled hall, and into a large conference room where Thea was waiting. She didn't look like a high-powered attorney preparing for battle. She looked like she hadn't slept in days, her eyes blazing with a potent mix of fury and resolve. "Ilara," she said, her voice tight with stress. She motioned to a chair across the vast, polished table. "Sit down. We have to go over everything." I stayed where I was, gripping my bag as if it were a life preserver. "Just tell me what you know." Thea gave a grim, tired nod. "Before I do, you have to understand that he's more than just unfaithful." I hugged my arms around my body, a sudden chill sweeping through me. "Then you need to start talking." She took a long, unsteady breath. "Julian wasn't just having an affair. He was using her. He targets influential people in the media, people he thinks he can control. He has a messiah complex, believes everyone is just a piece on his chessboard." Thea started pacing the length of the room, her fists clenched at her sides. But this woman, this journalist, was smarter and more principled than he ever imagined. A cold knot of dread formed in my stomach. "Who?" Thea stopped and faced me. "A senior investigative reporter. Her name was Chloe Sterling." The name from the documents on the cloud drive echoed in my mind. But Thea's next words sucked the air from my lungs. "What do you mean, was?" "He met Chloe at a tech summit in Davos. He thought he could charm her, feed her a controlled narrative for the exposé she was writing on his company, Ethelred. She played along, letting him believe he was pulling the strings." The bitter taste of betrayal rose in my throat. "What did he do to her?" "He tried to buy her silence," Thea said, her voice vibrating with rage. "When she wouldn't take the money, he threatened her. He promised to destroy her career, plant fabricated stories about her, and go after her family. She came to me 3 weeks ago, looking for legal counsel. She was scared. A few days later, she disappeared." A cold sweat broke out on my skin. Disappeared? Her editor said she went off-grid to finish the story. That's what they told the police. But Chloe would never just abandon a piece this big. Thea locked her gaze on me. The last thing she sent me was one single, encrypted audio file. It was recorded the night she went missing. My breathing became shallow. "Are you saying—" Thea's nod was slow and deliberate. "Yes. Julian knows exactly where Chloe is." The walls of the conference room felt like they were shrinking. Then Thea delivered the final, devastating blow. The affair was never the real story, Alara. It was the cover-up. By the following morning, the foundation of my entire world had crumbled to dust. I sat in Thea's office, staring into a cup of tea I couldn't bring myself to drink. Sleep had been impossible. My mind was a cinema, replaying every lie Julian had ever told me. Thea stood by the window, overlooking the Bay Bridge, her phone buzzing nonstop. Ethelred stock is in a nosedive, she announced, reading a new alert. The board has convened an emergency meeting. An anonymous source leaked documents to the Wall Street Journal about systemic, illegal data harvesting. My pulse hammered against my ribs. You think Julian was breaking the law? Thea turned from the window, her face a mask of grim certainty. I think Julian was selling private user data to foreign governments, and his partners are just beginning to grasp the extent of their exposure to federal charges. I should have felt shock, but instead, a cold, sharp lucidity washed over me. For years, he'd gaslighted me, convincing me I was paranoid, jealous, and unstable. Watching his kingdom of lies start to burn felt like a terrible, but righteous, validation. But Thea had more. His PR firm issued a statement an hour ago, she continued. They're spinning Chloe as an obsessive journalist with a personal vendetta who was trying to blackmail him with a fabricated story. The getaways, the gifts, I whispered, all meticulously documented as payments to a media consultant, Thea confirmed. It was part of the false trail Chloe uncovered. The mention of her name sent another chill down my spine. So, Chloe knew what he was really doing? She figured all of it out, Thea said. She realized Julian was intentionally fanning the flames of the affair rumors. It was a classic diversion. Get the tabloids focused on a cheating scandal, so no one would look at the treason he was committing. What do you think he did to her? I asked, my voice barely audible. Thea's expression turned to stone. I think Chloe found the one file that could put him in a federal prison for the rest of his life, and he made sure both she and that file vanished. Before the horror of her words could fully register, Thea's phone lit up again. This time she went completely still, the color draining from her face. What is it? I asked, getting to my feet. She turned the phone for me to see the breaking news banner. Tech. CEO Julian Croft detained by FBI agents for questioning in connection with the disappearance of journalist Chloe Sterling. I exhaled a breath I hadn't realized I was holding. So it's done. Thea shook her head slowly, her eyes dark with a stark warning. Alara, a man like Julian never goes down quietly. There is nothing more dangerous than a predator backed into a corner. As if her words were a prophecy, my phone vibrated on the table. A text from an unknown number. Julian's voice was sharp. You shouldn't be in there. But it was too late. My eyes were glued to the document on my screen. I had been searching our shared cloud for travel insurance papers when I saw a locked folder named Contingency. I typed in our anniversary, and it opened. Inside was a file, trust_CS_draft. I clicked it, and my world fractured. It was a legal agreement, establishing a $50 million trust for a child. The mother's name was listed as Chloe Sterling. Julian's voice, usually so measured and smooth, was a venomous snarl on the recording. My sister, Thea, watched my face as I played the audio file Chloe had sent her. Chloe, Julian's voice spat from my phone's speaker, you are making a fatal miscalculation. You do not get to make demands of me. A woman's voice replied, clear and steady. The unredacted server log. I have a full copy, Julian. The recording cut off with an abrupt click. Thea's expression was grim. He sounds panicked, she observed. That means Chloe had him cornered. She must have found the smoking gun. My throat closed up. What could be worse than selling his company's data? Thea gave me a grave look. How about selling classified location data from government employee phones to a hostile foreign power? The air in the immaculate office suddenly felt thin and freezing. Do you think he hurt her? Thea didn't have to speak. She walked to her desk, retrieved a thick binder from her briefcase, and placed it on the conference table between us. I pulled this from the smart bracelet Julian gave you. It was hidden inside the clasp. My sister Chloe held up a tiny memory card between two fingers. These are encrypted files Sasha uploaded right before she went missing. I didn't want to show you until you were here, completely away from him. My hands felt cold as I took the drive. Chloe plugged it into her laptop, and a folder of documents appeared. It's the raw data from the clinical trials for Elysian's new nerve regeneration drug. The rate of cellular degradation is far higher than they reported. He buried the real results. He's lobbying for early approval from the European Medical Agency. If I disappear, access the Zurich backup server. He'll know what that means. A different file was time-stamped just a few hours later. He knows I have a copy. Then the last one, sent at 3:30 a.m. He's outside my building. I should have never agreed to see him. Tears blurred the screen. How did the police miss this? Oh, they investigated, Chloe said, her voice dripping with contempt. And they took Julian at his word. He had portrayed Sasha as a brilliant but unstable researcher, obsessed with him and selling secrets to a rival biotech firm. He presented the board with forged digital messages and a financial trail that suggested corporate espionage. They believed every bit of it. His reputation as a Seattle tech visionary, alongside his massive contributions to local charities, made him untouchable. A hot, furious anger began to replace my shock. Julian hadn't just had an affair. He hadn't just cheated on me. He had systematically destroyed a woman who posed a threat to his perfect empire. Then, a second thought struck me like a physical blow. The encrypted financial alerts my sister had been showing me. They weren't Sasha's transactions, Chloe said softly. The offshore transfers were initiated by someone else using a ghost account. Who? She shook her head, her gaze glued to her screen. A whistleblower, someone inside Elysian Dynamics, who knew what Sasha had discovered and was trying to raise a flag. Before I could process that, a breaking news alert pinged on Chloe's tablet. She looked down at it, and her face went pale. What is it? I asked, my voice barely a whisper. She angled the tablet toward me. The headline shone in the low light of the apartment. Catastrophic data breach at Elysian Dynamics headquarters in South Lake Union. My heart seized. I read the final paragraph. Sources suggest a targeted EMP blast, which appears to have originated in the company's primary research and development server vault. The words echoed in the silent room, sounding the death of the life I thought I had. Server vault, deliberately targeted. My first reaction was disbelief. Julian didn't solve problems with electromagnetic pulses. He used contracts and buyout clauses. He was an innovator, a titan of the tech industry. But as I connected the pieces, the secret accounts, Sasha's disappearance, the precise destruction of his research data, I understood that wiping the servers clean was the only option a guilty man had left. I felt a gentle flutter deep within me, a tiny kick that pulled me into a terrifying new reality. Amelia, we need to leave, Chloe said, her voice sharp, breaking through my daze. I laid a protective hand across my pregnant stomach. We have to go somewhere. He can't find us, I mumbled, mostly to myself. Chloe looked at me with a fierce, steady determination that I was profoundly grateful for. Amelia, we need to get out of here right now. If Julian is desperate enough to do this, he's completely unpredictable. I drew in a long, shaky breath. Where on earth could we even go? I have a client's cabin up in the Cascades, she said. Totally off-grid. Even Julian's security team couldn't find it on a satellite image. In moments, Chloe had us in motion. As we took the freight elevator down from our high-rise condo, I cradled my belly, my frantic pulse slowing only when I concentrated on the life I was now entirely responsible for. I was no longer just running away from Julian. I was running to protect my child. The elevator doors slid open into a parking garage. Chloe's car was parked in a dark corner. The drive out of the city was a blur, the sleek glass towers of Seattle giving way to the dense, dark forests of the mountains. The cabin felt like a different universe, a safe harbor in the middle of a hurricane. I went to the window and put my hand on the cool glass. The moonlight illuminated towering pine trees that stood like silent guardians. I had spent years inside a beautiful cage, so afraid of losing the lifestyle, the prestige, and the man I thought I loved, that I never realized the door had been locked the entire time. The most reckless thing I had ever done was trust him. Chloe came to stand next to me. Amelia, there's something else. Just before the news broke, I caught one final data packet from the whistleblower. My stomach clenched into a hard, painful knot. What was it? A piece of an audio file. It's Julian's voice. He said you were a liability, but that he wasn't the one you should be worried about. A cold fear crept up my spine. Not worried about him? That's ridiculous. Chloe was quiet for a second. He said his partners were resolving the situation, and that they wouldn't be stopping with him. At that exact moment, a motion sensor by the front door chimed softly. Both Chloe and I froze. Nobody should know we're here. The sensor chimed again, followed by a man's calm, unfamiliar voice from a small speaker near the door. Chloe, please open up. I'm your contact from Elysian Dynamics. That voice, so composed and quiet, was more frightening than any shout could have been. Amelia is in grave danger. You have to let me in. My blood turned to ice. I stepped back from the door, my hand instinctively covering my belly. Chloe moved to stand in front of me, her posture changing from worried sister to cautious forensic accountant. It was the stance of someone calculating risk. Don't move an inch, Chloe whispered to me. The voice came through the speaker again. You're not safe in that cabin, Amelia. Not with the baby coming, and not with what he left you. Chloe's expression was unreadable. He knows about the baby. He knows where we are. This isn't a coincidence. I fought to speak, but the fear was a solid weight in my chest. What do we do? Chloe walked to the security panel by the door. On its screen, a night vision camera showed a young man standing on the porch. He looked more like a nervous intern than a killer, but his eyes were wide with a desperate urgency. That wasn't just a threat, Chloe murmured, her gaze fixed on the screen. Those offshore accounts were funneled through an entity called the Cygnus Collective. My heart began to pound against my ribs. What's that? They're corporate fixers, Chloe said, her voice heavy. Specialists in industrial espionage and asset protection. If Julian was paying them, this is about much more than a failed drug trial. The speaker crackled, the man's voice becoming more insistent. Chloe, please. I am trying to keep you both alive. The word alive landed like a physical blow. My voice shook. Chloe, what is happening? Chloe kept her eyes on the screen and pressed the talk button. State your name and your purpose for being here. There was a short pause. Then, my name is Leo, and Julian's partners didn't just want his mistress silenced. Sasha discovered what the Cygnus Collective was really developing. Now they think Amelia has the only copy of her research. My pulse hammered in my ears. What research? Leo leaned toward the camera. The music box. The antique music box Julian gave her. Sasha swapped the internal mechanism with an encrypted drive. Julian's partners are convinced he passed it on to you. My breath hitched. I don't have any music box. It doesn't make a difference, Leo's voice said through the speaker. They are certain that you do. Chloe's voice was as sharp as broken glass. Who, Leo? Who are they? He hesitated, and the silence that filled the next few seconds was more chilling than any name he could have given. This is much bigger than Julian Croft, he said quietly. He was just the face of the company. The world felt like it was tilting on its axis. The speaker crackled one final time as his voice dropped to a frantic whisper. Amelia, they are activating the protocol tonight. For a long, terrifying moment, the mountain cabin was completely silent. The sound of the wind in the trees seemed to die away as his words hung in the air. They are activating it tonight. My mind spun. What protocol? What had Sasha found that was so critical they would make her disappear and now come after me? Suddenly, Chloe was a blur of controlled motion, her cautious demeanor gone, replaced by raw urgency. Amelia, go to the back bedroom. Lock the door and stay low, away from the window. Go now. I hurried through the small living area, one arm protectively around my stomach. It's okay, little one, I whispered, trying to calm myself as much as the baby. Mommy will protect you. I turned the old-fashioned key in the lock and leaned my ear against the heavy pine door. When I dared to peek back into the main room, Chloe was on her laptop, her fingers moving with incredible speed. There's an old service truck at the bottom of the access road behind the cabin, she said, her voice a sharp command. They won't expect you to leave through the woods. A fresh wave of panic washed over me. Do you think they know where you are? I think they were always monitoring him, Chloe answered, her face lit by the screen's blue light. Julian wasn't just paranoid. He was a pawn. A loud splintering crack came from the front of the cabin. It wasn't a knock. It was the sound of a boot kicking in the door. Amelia? My husband's voice called out from the front porch, distorted by a bullhorn. This can all be over. Just give them the bracelet. A cold shock ran through me. The bracelet, the custom titanium smart bracelet he'd given me for our anniversary, saying it was a health monitor prototype. I was still wearing it. This was a coordinated trap. Leo's voice screamed from the security panel, filled with raw terror. Don't open that door. Those aren't his men. They're Ethelred's people, he shouted, his voice cracking with urgency. Clara found out they were using Julian's smart grid tech to create surveillance backdoors for foreign intelligence. Julian wanted out. When Clara threatened to go public, they took her. Now they want the data key she copied. Elle's face was ashen. We are completely out of time. She kicked an antique Persian rug aside, exposing a flush-mounted steel ring in the hardwood floor. She yanked it, and a section of the floor hinged open, showing a steep, dark staircase descending into blackness. Clara, she commanded, turning to me, you have to go. This leads to the old service tunnels under Pacific Heights. I have a contact waiting. The code phrase is Ethelred is calling. But what about you? I choked out. She shoved me gently toward the opening. I'll wipe the servers here and create a data trail for them to follow. They want a file, not a pregnant architect. A loud crack echoed from the front door as the reinforced frame began to splinter. I spun around to head down into the dark. In that precise moment, the power to the entire penthouse died. The blackness was instantaneous and absolute, a heavy, smothering quilt that felt targeted, as if a master switch for the whole block had been thrown. I froze, one hand gripping the cold concrete wall of the passage. Behind me, I heard the main door to the apartment finally shatter and crash open. Every instinct screamed at me to run. My blood went cold as I stared at the encrypted files, the lines of code glowing on the tablet screen in the dark office. Clara. His voice was a smooth, silken threat from the doorway. Julian, I'm pregnant, I whispered, my hand instinctively shielding my stomach. His own hand, weighted by a modern black tungsten wedding band, came down on my shoulder. From the entrance of his vast, glass-walled study, his voice was chillingly calm. "You're being emotional. Close that before you stumble into something you can't possibly navigate." His meaning was crystal clear. "Forget what you saw, Clara. This stays in this room." I felt a tiny flutter, a little life pushing against my palm in protest. He wasn't just hiding an affair. This was a schematic for massive, illegal data trafficking. And I had just found the master key. Julian stepped closer, his voice dropping to a menacing whisper. "Clara, you will not be leaving this penthouse." My fingers trembled as I covertly pocketed an old brass key from a decorative bowl. On the bookshelf, the narrow door to the old service access panel clicked open without a sound. Using my phone's flashlight to slice through the gloom, I slipped into the musty, confined space as the sound of his deliberate footsteps crossed the minimalist wool rug behind me. The crawl space was a tight, claustrophobic tunnel. The air was stale with the smell of concrete, his expensive cologne, and bitter betrayal. My unborn child was the only thing that felt real in this terrifying escape. "Oh, my sweet boy, I am so sorry. I know, but we have to go. I promise Mommy will keep you safe." A heavy thud reverberated through the steel and glass structure, the sound of his fist hitting the solid core door of the study. He was coming down the main floating staircase. I moved faster as I reached the ground level, my own ragged breathing roaring in my ears. Each step felt like a nightmare, slow and heavy. I could hear him now, the soft scuff of his designer sneakers on the polished concrete floor as he descended. "Don't be a fool, Clara." His voice echoed through the cavernous foyer. I whispered to my belly, "Just be still, my love. We are almost out." We made it to the service door in the garage just as his shape appeared at the far end of the long gallery hallway. Tall, furious, and silhouetted by the faint city lights filtering through the floor-to-ceiling windows. His form moved down the corridor, a hunter closing in. My heart hammered against my ribs. The door was dead-bolted, needing the old, heavy key I was now fumbling to fit into the lock. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely guide the key. Stuck. It was still stuck. His walk became a powerful, unhurried march. "This ends now, Clara," he called. "Let's go back upstairs." I gave the key one last, frantic twist. A loud, metallic clank. The bolt retracted. I wrenched the door open and fell out into the chilly, damp night air. The paved service alley was silent, but for the sound of my own gasping breaths. A dark SUV was idling by the street. Its passenger door swung open, and a calm voice called, "Clara, for God's sake, get in." It was my best friend, level-headed, fearless, and utterly terrified for me, Elara. Before I could speak, she was leaning over the console, pulling my seatbelt tight across me, and helping me slam the heavy door. I mashed the lock button down just as Julian's hand slammed against the window, his face a twisted mask of pure rage. One of the other figures shouted, "Get out of the car, now!" Elara stomped on the accelerator. The tires screamed on the wet pavement, the sound ricocheting off the concrete walls like a gunshot. The SUV shot forward, navigating the tight alley until we burst onto the rain-slicked San Francisco street. It felt like my heart was going to break right through my sternum. My baby gave a sudden, powerful kick. "It's okay. We're safe now." Elara gave me a sharp look, her face grim. "We are not being followed. I know who she is." She focused back on the road, her knuckles white on the steering wheel. "Julian isn't just having an affair, Clara. He's owned by them. And right now, that makes you a massive problem." "What are you talking about?" I pleaded. "They were going to neutralize you tonight." "Their plan was to convince you to stay silent," Elara explained. "But the second you decrypted the files, On the Odyssey project's data sales, you became a variable they had to eliminate. The city lights blurred into streaks across the glass. Rain hammered the windshield. Alara made a hard turn, merging into the traffic on the Embarcadero, just as Julian's black sedan materialized in our side mirror. "He's right behind us," Alara said, her jaw tight. "Then let's give him a reason to be." She expertly navigated her phone with one hand. "I'm sending the entire decrypted data packet to my contact at the Justice Department." A cold dread washed over me. "But Julian is the one who gave me the password to that server." Alara's eyes met mine in the rearview mirror. "Julian trusted you would be too wrapped up in the pregnancy to ever look that deep. He knew I'd help you burn his empire to the ground if he ever really betrayed you. I didn't say anything sooner, because you had to be the one to find the proof." Her voice softened slightly. "And now you have." His car was closing the distance. Alara muttered, "Hold on." We veered sharply, taking an off-ramp toward the port, triggering a symphony of angry car horns. Julian's sedan was cut off by a transport truck, its headlights shrinking behind us, until they vanished completely. The taillights faded into the city fog. Alara reached over and took my hand. "Clara, breathe. The second my guy Marcus gets this to the U.S. attorney, Julian won't be hunting you. He'll be hiding from them." For the first time in what felt like an eternity, the knot of terror in my chest began to loosen. Just then, Alara's phone buzzed. She glanced at the screen, and all the color drained from her face. "It's Marcus," she said, her voice a ghost of a whisper. "He says Julian is back at the Pacific Heights penthouse." My mouth felt like sand. "Is he alone?" Alara shook her head, slowly and deliberately. "No, and Marcus says Julian left a package for you." Marcus met us in the sterile marble lobby of a downtown federal building as the first light began to break. The sky over the bay was a deep, unsettled gray, and all of San Francisco seemed to be holding its breath. I held my stomach as Marcus led us into an elevator, his professional quietness more unnerving than any warning could be. Alara stood by the panoramic windows while Marcus placed a sealed evidence bag on the long conference table. Inside was a single document, a detailed schematic for a new data center, the very project Serena had used to build her professional reputation, the one that won her industry awards and accolades. Now it just looked like the blueprint for a felony. "This was in a courier envelope left on your doorstep," Marcus said softly. "Julian's driver dropped it off less than an hour ago." My voice came out as a fragile whisper. "So this schematic, this is a message from him." Marcus nodded grimly. "He also sent a voice memo with it, addressed to you." My hands felt disconnected from my body as I took the phone he held out. Julian's polished corporate photo was on the screen, but the voice that played was broken and hollow, stripped of all its usual confidence. "Clara," he started, "I swear I never wanted you to find this out. I had no idea she was planning to use the back doors to embezzle from your family's initial seed funding. By the time I figured out she was positioning me to be the fall guy, it was locked in. I thought I could code my way out of it." He paused, his breathing ragged on the recording. "But you can't patch a betrayal like this." "What I did," he corrected, his voice finally breaking. "I'm sorry for all of it. The stolen code, the drained investor accounts, the damage to your heart. You and our baby deserved so much more than a fraud." The audio file went silent. The emptiness that followed was cavernous. I felt like the floor was about to give way, but instead of collapsing, a strange, quiet resolve settled deep in my bones. Marcus stepped forward. "The encrypted drive you pulled from the server is with the SEC now. A team is securing your penthouse as we speak, and Sloan Evans was taken into custody at the San Francisco office just before the emergency board meeting." Justice. It didn't feel like a triumph, just the final line of code in a program that had run its course. Marcus exhaled slowly. You're both safe from the fallout now, Alara. You and your child. You're safe. The word sounded like a language I was just learning. I felt a soft flutter deep inside me. Mom, do you think we could live somewhere a little more analog? I imagined my child asking me years from now. A genuine smile touched my lips. I think that's a great idea. Marcus waited a beat, his presence a source of steady, unassuming strength. Alara, I know the timing is awful, but when you're ready to build again, not to escape this, but to create something real, I hope you'll let me be there. Just as a friend, for both of you. His sincerity felt like the first ray of sunshine after a long, foggy week. For the first time in what seemed like a lifetime, I allowed myself to imagine a future built on authenticity and trust, not one where I was constantly braced for the next system crash. I nodded, tears blurring my vision. Maybe we can start now. And in that moment, the future finally felt like it was mine to write again. And that, dear friends, is where her real story began. If you've followed this narrative to its conclusion, it's likely because some aspect of it struck a chord deep inside you. Maybe it served as a testament to a struggle you have personally overcome. Maybe it held a piece of insight you were meant to find today. Or maybe it was just a quiet affirmation that even after the most destructive storms, a new morning is always waiting to dawn. The great thinkers of Stoicism had a name for this principle. The obstacle is the way. Alara's trial by fire is a perfect demonstration of this concept. Every layer of deception became a painful but essential discovery of her own value. Every loss made space for a different kind of life to take root. Every event that was designed to break her spirit instead forged her into someone stronger, more capable, and more intimately aware of her own inner strength. As the sage Epictetus taught, it's not what happens to you, but how you react to it that matters. This is the essential truth of her journey. We may not have power over our circumstances, but we always have power over our response. If Alara can walk through a fire like that and find her way back to the light, then so can you. Before you click away, I want to ask you, did her story resonate with you? Did it help you feel a little less alone, or perhaps see your own challenges from a new perspective? If it did, I would be so honored if you would press the like button. Share this with someone who could use a little bit of hope this evening, and of course, join our community by subscribing. Your engagement is what allows these stories to reach the very people who need to hear them. As we conclude, it is vital for me to state unequivocally for the YouTube platform and for every person watching. The narrative you have just heard is a work of complete fiction. It was crafted solely for the purpose of entertainment and emotional exploration. Any resemblance to actual persons, life events, or particular situations is entirely coincidental. The characters, their conflicts, and the resolution of the plot were all conceived with the intent to inspire, to soothe, and to offer our audience a safe harbor for considering powerful themes of recovery, resilience, and self-discovery. No element of this presentation should be interpreted as a factual account or a real-world report. Our singular goal is to create and distribute compelling narratives that speak to the universal human experience, encouraging all of us to reflect on our own journeys with deeper compassion and wisdom. We are grateful you were here with us today, for your open heart and for the gift of your time and attention.